Hi, my name's Ed Nolan and I'm a psychology teacher at Queen Elizabeth Sixth Form College. And in this film, we are going to introduce you to the investigating human behaviour component of our A Level Psychology course. Before we start, I want you to think about what is psychology. You may have seen the answer on the home page of this Google site. But psychology can be defined as the science of mind and behaviour. So not only do we look at the way people think and feel, but we investigate that. And this is so important that it's 1/3 of your A-level course. So here we have a psychologist who is investigating using an EEG machine on her participants. That measures electrical activity in her brain. We know it's scientific because she's got a white lab coat on. Here's another research psychologist, Angela Duckworth. She's from Canada and was very interested in resilience and came up with the idea of grit. Please see the TED Talk below if you want to learn more about her work. Let's say she is interested in looking at human excellence and wants to investigate that. There are a number of different ways that she can do that. First of all, she could carry out an experiment. This is a method only used by psychologists and often used where they will take different variables and create conditions, experimental conditions and control conditions, and then investigate the effect that it has. So one you'll be looking at is Elizabeth Loftus and her partner Palmer, and they investigated the impact of asking different types of questions on the estimated speed of cars in car accidents. Now, another option is what's called a quasi-experiment. This is where the researcher doesn't control the variables, but they happen naturally. One study you'll be looking at is Adrian Raine, who is actually from Darlington, but at the University of Pennsylvania now, and grew up on Abbey Road, just by our college. Adrian Raine was interested in the brains of murderers, so he took the normal group of individuals and some murderers, convicted murderers, and using what's called a PET scan, analysed neural activity. You can see here that the normal person at their frontal cortex is very active with lots of red and yellow, but the murderer is not, showing a difference in the brain activity of murderers and non-murderers. Another option for Angela Duckworth might be to do an observation, which is what it says on the tin. You watch people's behaviour. You can do this in a controlled way, or you can do it in a natural way. One controlled observation you'll be looking at in detail is one by Stanley Milgram, who looked at whether people would carry out destructive behaviour, meaning harming someone, just because they were told to. Please see the links below. An alternative option is to speak to them by doing a questionnaire or an interview. One study we'll look at is by Lawrence Kohlberg, who did what's called a longitudinal study. He interviewed young boys and gave them moral questions and moral dilemmas to solve, and then did the same as they grew up and interviewed them as men, and found that the way that they solved these problems was different. Correlations are an unusual type of study because instead of looking at differences, they will look at how things are similar, or how the relationships are. So as you can see here, there's a positive relationship between how much time students spend revising and their exam scores. Case studies often are used by psychologists when there's very unusual behaviour. And this is when you do an in-depth study on one or a small group of individuals. One type of study you'll look at is by John Bowlby, and he did case studies interviewing young boys and found that those who'd spent a lot of time separated from their mothers were more likely to commit crimes later on. Last of all, what Angela Duckworth could do is brain scan. But here we have some pictures of some CAT scans which Tori took. Tori was interested in the difference between brains with people who suffer from a severe mental health problem called schizophrenia, where they have delusions or where they believe things that are not real or withdrawal from society. And as you can see here, comparing the two brains, this part here, these are called ventricles here, are much larger than the control, the healthy brain, showing that actually schizophrenia might be a result of brain activity. Now, as you can see, Angela Duckworth, if she wanted to look at human excellence, has many different ways of investigating human behaviour. If you're interested in correlational studies, have a go at the taster activity below. So what will you be studying as part of your A-level psychology? Well, you'll be studying on how to decide a research question, how to form a hypothesis, how to define things so you can measure them, behaviours or variables so you can measure them. You'll be investigating on how to select people to be part of your study and also to ensure that they are a reliable and a representative sample group. You'll be looking at different research methods that we've just looked at with the Angela Duckworth situation in the previous slide. You'll be able to look at whether studies are consistent, and consistency is really important in science, and that means reliable, and valid means whether we're measuring what we claim to measure. Are they legitimate studies? We'll look at ethical issues. Because we're using humans in our studies, we have to really think about what we do with them and how we keep them safe. Yes, you will be looking at data as well. You'll be able to draw data. You'll have to be able to look at things like a graph and interpret that and to create one and do a little bit of calculations, but no more than you would have done in your GCSE maths. And finally, in your second year, you will be planning and carrying out your own investigations, analysing the data, of which you'll respond to in the exam. So what we'd like you to do now is have a go. So do the taster activity below on the correlation study. It's really good fun.